Now let's have a look at something called JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Now the first point to note is that this thing is just its syntax is derived from JavaScript, but this is a generalized concept. It has nothing to do with JavaScript. Okay, so this is JSON is basically a data exchange format for the web, one of the standards in which the data is exchanged on the web, and it is agnostic to any programming languages. But the syntax of this is somewhat inspired by JavaScript, and that's why this is called JavaScript object notation. Okay, so what is JSON or JavaScript object notation? As we discussed, it is a lightweight data interchange format. So basically, it is a format where you send some data from the server to client or from client to server, and it is a very lightweight and human readable format in which the data can be exchanged between the client and server. So let me give you an example. So let's say so this is GitHub website, right? So where here this website is used for hosting your code, but if and this thing is mainly for like users, right? But if you see, then we will have some URL, something like api.github.com. If you open that, then you see that the output, this is also URL, right? But the output is not a like normal HTML web page, rather the output is JSON. So you'll see that in raw format, this is what it is returned from the server. So as you can understand that this thing is not directly for consumption of like as it's not a website, but it is a way where, so for example, let's say here we are seeing that yeah here current user URL is basically api .github.com/user, right? So for example, if you go to api.com/user, then you will get something like this. So right now obviously you have to hit this endpoint with proper authentication, and then that user data will come. But my point is that you can understand that this whole endpoint is about a place from where we can interchange data between the client and the server. So let's say you are working on github.com, then in the behind the scenes, basically some data is being exchanged from the server and client. So that is happening in this format. Now this format is what it is called JSON. As you can see that it is very simple, very lightweight, and it is human readable, and at the same time it is very easy to be parsed by the client or the server. Okay, so when they are communicating, it is very easy for them to understand. There are other ways of formatting data like XML or something, but right now as of today, the most popular format which is used on the web is JSON. In fact, later when we will be creating our own backend in this course, then we will be also using JSON format for exchanging the data between the client and the server, right? And the main thing is that this format which we are seeing is that now you can see that it is almost looking like JavaScript object, right? And that's why this thing is called JavaScript object notation, right? There are some similar, most of the things are similar, but however there are slight differences which you will see. So for example, in when you are creating a JSON in a normal JavaScript object, then this quotes around the key is not compulsory, right? You can simply write message without quotes, and the right part you can write that is fine, yeah, as in quotes. But in JSON, this quotes are compulsory. So these are slight variations, but all in all, this is like very similar to JavaScript objects, and that's why this is called JavaScript object notation. However, please note that this is completely different thing, right? This is not a JavaScript object. This is completely different thing. You can understand that this whole thing is a string sort of thing which is sent from server to client or something like that. Okay, so yeah, we'll understand a few more points about JSON, which we already discussed, that it is language independent, which means that when we are talking about this JSON data which is coming from the server, then there is no claim we are making that the backend has to be in JavaScript or something, right? The backend can be in Python, the backend can be in Java, right, or C sharp, and still this whole exchange of data will happen smoothly, right? Which means that we don't have any restrictions about that. This is only working for JavaScript or something. This entire thing is a standard, and it is a format for data exchange, and it is completely language independent. Okay, and as we discussed, it is easy to for humans also to read, and at the same time it is for also easy for machines to parse and create it on the fly. Okay, now let's go into a bit about the structure of the JSON. So as we discussed, it is somewhat looking like objects, but it is not completely like that. See, we will see a few differences. So first of all, JSON has two structures. One is like JavaScript object, and that is like key value pairs. That is key value pairs, with the slight difference that the keys must be in quotes, right? In double quotes. It's like strictly double quotes. Without quotes will also not work. Single quotes will also not work. This is like strictly double quotes as per the specification of JSON. That is one thing. Second thing is that it can also be an array. Okay, so arrays also constitute JSON, which means that it can be an ordered list of values, and it is similar to, again, it is similar to the array which is there in JavaScript, right? But then again, any programming language you are using, then they have concept of this key value pairs or dictionaries, or they have every programming language has some concept of arrays, which might be called lists, which might be called vectors in some programming languages. But the point is that I'm just giving you an example because we are doing this course in JavaScript. So I'm giving you an example that this thing is like an array and this thing is like an object. But again, this thing is completely separate specification, and it is programming language independent. Okay. Next, as I mentioned a couple of times, that the property name of a JSON, the first notation, which is object notation, that must be a string, and it should be in double quotes, right? So without quotes will not work, single quotes will not work, nothing. It has to be in double quotes. That is the string. So you can understand that it kind of is a subset. So what happens that in JavaScript the objects work with double quotes also, keys can be double quotes with double quotes also, with single quotes also, in fact without quotes also, like if it is a proper variable type of syntax, so it is not starting with number or something, then it can be proper without quotes also. But you can understand this like a subset of JavaScript, that notation. So here it has to be in double quotes. Now there are some more restrictions about the subset thing which we discussed, that the property value, this is about keys, right? The property value can be a string in double quotes always. If it is a string, it has to be in double quotes, not single quotes. Secondly, the value can be a number. And again, there are restrictions about not all number formats are supported. Like for example, exponential format is supported, but octal and hexadecimal formats are not supported. But it is a decent subset which works in most of the cases. So numbers can be there, strings can be there, true false, the boolean values can be there, and null can be there. Okay, so this is the standard thing. And again, in turn, each value can be in turn again an object on an array or an array. You can understand. So it can be a recursive. So like in objects we have seen that key and value can be again an object. So similarly here the objects are, the keys are obviously strings in double quotes, but values can again be strings, numbers, boolean, null, or again an object or array. Point to note that some other things which specific to JavaScript, something like undefined or something like that, is not valid. Okay, so as we are clearly seeing that this is a subset of the whole JavaScript thing. It is a strict subset which is valid across the various programming languages. Okay, we also mentioned earlier that octal and hexadecimal numbers are not valid here. So we'll see an example for that. Let's take a few simple examples first of all. So so everything what you are seeing here, these are not JavaScript things. Okay, so think of it like a like a simply text. You can understand that, let's say some file is there, and in that some text is there, right? And in that this thing is written. Okay, don't think that this is an object is equal to this thing. This is not like, you can understand this as a raw text, right? And that raw text is sent from client to server, or is sent as a body of some requests from server, from client to server. But this is the JavaScript notation I'm talking about, not array objects, or array not JavaScript objects, or JavaScript arrays. Okay, so again, this syntax, only this thing, only this array notation, that is also valid. So let's go back to the example which we are seeing here, right? So what are the formats in which, so in this case you can see that, yeah, I am getting an object sort of thing with key value, two key value pairs, right? And if you saw the earlier one, yeah, we saw this sort of thing, right? Where again this is an object, and again it has key value pairs, right? And we will use later in this course, there are some so let's say you have not built the backend, but you are just trying to create front end, and you want just some backend to give you this sort of data, but you have not created. So there are ways to create fake sort of this API through which you can just interact and later build yourself the backend, right? So for example, let's say you can do something like search something like JSON placeholder, right? And if you search, then you'll see a result which is like fake REST API. What is API, what is REST API, so that we will discuss later. But the point is that you can see that this is also some that's sort of similar, where you get endpoints like this. Okay, you get endpoints like this, and again this will be, you can see that these are again like JSON endpoints which returns data in JSON objects, right? Now so you can see that this is an again a JSON object, and this is like object notation, but we discussed that there can be array notation also, right? So this is like, if you give to dos 1, to dos 2, then it will just return you that particular ID. But if you simply go to to dos, then you will see that now you are getting an array of items. You can clearly see, so this is an array of items, right? So it can be a particular object directly, it can be an array of objects, or it can be an array of objects in which the values can again be arrays or objects, right? Like nested. Okay, so those things are possible. The simple example we were discussing, right? So these are the simple examples. If you want to see some example like this, then we can see like yeah, something like this is possible, where this array sort of notation is there, and inside that again object sort of notation is there, right? If you properly have only arrays, that is also fine. If you properly have only object sort of notation, that is also fine. And the corner case of that, the trivial example of that is like empty object or empty array sort of thing. Both, so all these are like JavaScript object. All these, we can say that these are JSONs, right? They are each one of them independently, not all of them combined, because each one independently has to be a valid JSON, right? So in this case, we can see that, for example, this is a valid JSON which can be like sort of exchanged between client and server. Now, as we discussed, that this notation is also valid. So that exponent format and normal format and decimal format, all those things are valid, but we cannot use octal or hexadecimal numbers here, right? So for example, something like this, let's say some key foo is there, right? And its value is 5, that is fine. 5.5, that is fine. 5e2, that is fine. Okay, these things are fine, but I cannot write a hexadecimal number, something like ox12. Okay, if you remember, then this sort of thing is actually valid in JavaScript, pure JavaScript, but it is not valid inside JSON, right? So if you print this, then you will see that I got 18. How I got 18? I got 18 because it is starting with OX. If something is starting with 0x, then it means that it is a hexadecimal number in JavaScript. Okay, and it means that it is a base 16. Hexadecimal means base 16. So basically, this thing is like not base 10. So if something is like base 10, how do you evaluate its value? You say that it is 1 into 10 raised to the power 1 plus 2, right? And if it is like 312, then you will say that it is 3 into 10 raised to the power 2 plus. So this is how you calculate. This is how you calculate decimal numbers, right? So units place, tens place, hundreds place, and like that you calculate the whole thing. The point is that if you have something like, let's say, ox, or it is like 0, not o, so 0x if you have, then this is a hexadecimal number, which means that it is not base 10. So you will do something like 16 raised to the power 1, and you will do 16 raised to the power 2, and that, like that, it will be calculated. So it's, let's say, simply it is 1 2, then it means that 1 into 16 raised to the power 1 plus 2, and that's why when we printed, the answer was 1 into 16 plus 2, 18. And that's why, so whenever you print some number, it will be always decimal, but internally you can represent it like exponential. So if you write something like let's say 5e2, right, then you can see that you are getting 500, right? So it is 5 into 10 square, so 500. Similarly, you can have a hexadecimal number. There is another third format, which is octal number. So if you start a number with 0, okay, then it is an octal number. So if you meant 12, then don't write 0 12, okay, simply write 12. This means decimal 12. But if you start something with 0, then it means octal number. Now it is base 8, not 16. So if you start with 0x, it is base 16. If you start with 0, then it is base 10. Sorry, base 8, right? 0 1 2 means it is octal, which means base 8, which means that if you calculate this thing, then it is 1 2 in base 8. 1 2 in base 8 is what? 1 into 8 raised to the power 1 plus 2. So it is octal, right? If again it is like some 3 is there, then it will be 3 into 8 square or something like that, right? Okay, so what does this mean? This means 8, 1 into 8, 8 plus 2, 10. So if you print this, then you will see that this last thing is 10. That's why, okay? But if you simply use without those things, then that will be a normal decimal value, 12, okay? So but the point is that this format and this format, these two formats are supported in JSON, but these sort of formats are not supported, okay? So you don't try to write those sort of formats inside JSON. So but these two are valid. And again, normal, all the keys have to be in double quotes, that is fine. 1 2 and hello, okay? So all these are like, we saw that. And again, you can write null here, you can write true here, false here, you can string in double quotes, and numbers with the compulsions, restrictions, which we discussed. All those things we can do. And again, you can do these recursively, which means that you can have an array where the items are objects like this. Again, in turn, you can have this value rather than this 5, you can have again an array or an array of objects. So that nested things, recursive things is possible. In fact, I'll show you an example for that. So for example, in JSON placeholders, you will see that there is a user's endpoint. So if you go to this user's endpoint, then you'll see an example of complicated example. So you can see that here, here it is an array of objects where in some cases in this object, this key and this value is again an object, where there is a key and where again there is an object. So it can go to any level, so that is fine, okay? But the entire semantic has to be like this, that either it will be an object type, or like object thing, or like an array thing, and internally only like keys will be in quotes, and the values can be like a string, number, boolean, and the restrictions which you discussed, right? So this is these are some of the few examples. One thing you might be noticing that, yeah, I am writing here everything in one line, right here they are writing like in multi-line. So is this valid? Yeah. So basically whether you write it in multi-line or like one line, that is fine, or as soon as the parsing is correct, right, the whole thing which you're writing. So the white spaces don't matter, which means that this extra space, if you remove this extra space, that is fine. If you put a new line, same thing you write like in multiple lines, like this, that is also fine. But but you should just understand that whatever is the semantic that has to be followed, otherwise everything white spaces doesn't matter. So that will be clear from this example. So the same thing which is written here, this thing is exactly same as this thing, right? So you can clearly see that yeah, this a is in a string, and then in quotes, right, double quotes, and then you can write like put new lines, that is fine, and again comma, and you can use these sort of lines, right, that is fine. It's just one more thing. When we were discussing the examples, like in JavaScript, we saw that the arrays can be something like this also, right? So the arrays can be something like this also. So let's say 1 2 3 is there, right, and you print this array. So this syntax is obviously valid. You can have a comma at the end also, and it will not give you a syntax error, right? It was later introduced in ES6, and right now it is completely valid, and it will be like same when you print, it will like ignore that, but technically when you're writing, it is completely valid, right? And at the same and in a similar manner, like when we are having objects key value pairs. So if you are having, let's say, some object, right, and let's say you declare it in multiple lines. So let's say foo, and let's say its value is bar, and let's say some other value is there, let's say a and 20. Okay, then here also you can put a comma and at the end, right? So if you print this object, then you can clearly see that this thing is exactly same as this thing. So if I remove or don't remove, in both cases it is fine, same thing. But that is not the case in JSON, right? In JSON, like it is slightly I told you, it is a stricter subset of sort of JavaScript syntax, right? So here you cannot write 5 comma 10 comma, this is invalid, right? Similarly here, like this key value pair is ended, right, and after this key value pair has ended, you cannot write like again comma, right? So for example, here at the end also you cannot write comma. Here hello world, after that also you cannot write comma. After 10 close bracket also you cannot write comma. Okay, so those things which are allowed in JavaScript normal syntax, they are not allowed here. This is like a slightly stricter version of that. Okay, so now we are seeing that yeah, it is like almost like similar to JavaScript native arrays or native objects, we can see. But is there a way to interchange? So let's say I want to send this data to server, right? Or I'm right now on the server and I want to send this data to the client. But before sending it to the client, I need to convert it into JSON, right? So that it is available to the user like this. Okay, but when I want to send this data to the client, or vice versa, then we need to convert our native JavaScript objects or arrays to the JSON, actually JSON string, right? Now how do we do that? That is the one which we are going to discuss in something called Json Stringify, which we will cover in the next video.